Dr. Nyssa Silbiger. I am a professor at a university in California in Los Angeles called California State University Northridge, and I'm a marine ecologist. And so I'm generally interested in how climate change and other human-driven stressors affect our coastal ecosystem in places like coral reefs and in rocky intertidal systems. There are rocky intertidal systems all over the world. Coral reefs are pretty much just in the tropics. But I started out with my interest in marine biology at a very young age because I grew up in Florida next to the ocean. And so I was always curious in the ocean, but I didn't necessarily know I wanted to be a scientist right off the bat. I just knew I wanted to do something with the ocean and something with conservation. And so my path to that was like a little bit windy. I at first thought I wanted to be an environmental lawyer, and I took one political philosophy class in college and decided that was not for me. And really, I loved science. I stuck with the sciences, and then I knew that I was in biology, but I wasn't 100% sure if I wanted to do marine biology. And then through a couple of internships that I was able to get in the Florida Keys, that really kind of solidified, my path into marine biology. So there's lots of ways to be a scientist. You don't have to be a professor or an academic to be a scientist. You can work for government agencies all over the world that work in conservation. You can work in nonprofit agencies. You may have heard of like the World Wildlife Fund or the Nature Conservancy. If you want to go into other type of like conservation style fields, like with what I do, you can be a technician, you can be a data analyst. There's lots of different pathways into science, or in my particular field, into marine biology. And the pathway that I took was through graduate school. So if you want to be an academic scientist, you need to go to graduate school and have a master's if you want a technical career, or a PhD if you want to lead a lab. And those basically are graduate school programs where you come up with a thesis idea. And so it's some novel idea that you've come up with, and then you test a bunch of hypotheses, you run experiments, gain a lot of skills in your field, and then you graduate. So that's basically the pathway that I took. For those of you in high school, and so, take those very seriously, but don't be scared to go do hands-on stuff as early as you want. We have high school students that work in the labs here where I work at CSUN that come and volunteer or do internships, going to work at an aquarium or going to work at the zoo if you're in a more like conservation field style team, or doing those summer internship programs as well. And you learn all these different skills, and you meet a lot of people that could help you move forward as you move in with your career. But a lot of times people get overwhelmed when they go into the first year of college because they're like, I don't necessarily know what I want to do. And that is completely normal. You don't need to have everything figured out. And in fact, trying lots of different things is my biggest advice, because you never know that if something else might spark your interest. So as I said before, when I was a freshman, I wanted to be in environmental law, and then I very quickly decided that wasn't for me. But as far as my research is concerned, I developed that passion over like 12 years. It's not like I didn't wake up one day and was like, I'm going to study climate change and coral reefs. I, learned and experienced and worked in lots of different labs, and then honed in on both what my skills were and what really excited me. And that's kind of how I ended up where I am today. Yeah. About like where I was going to go to college. And that's the other thing. I mean, I know the European system is so different than the American system because when it comes to schooling, but for my field, the name of the school doesn't matter so much as the people that you work with and the experiences that you have. And so going into a school where you feel like you can thrive the best is way more important than having Harvard or Princeton or Oxford or whatever it is on your degree program. I went to all state funded schools. I didn't go to any fancy schools, and I got into the field that I wanted to get into, and I got into the career that I wanted to get into, and I feel like I've been successful in the ways that I want to be successful. And that is something else that's important, is like figuring out what success is for you, which is a particularly important thing as a woman, which I can talk about as well, because there's lots of differences between, being a woman and scientist versus being a man in science. And one of the most obvious ones is family. And many women that have kids, when they're trying to be in graduate school or go up for tenure or any other stage of their career, it can be really daunting, because we're then trying to move up at a step that then gets pulled to the side and then come back and move up and then pull to the side and back and move up, where, the men are just moving, because they don't need to take 9 months to be pregnant, or, even if they do take family leave, which is like fantastic that that's happening more and more, they don't have a physical impact on their body in the same way that we do. And so that is definitely like a big struggle for women in my field, is, there aren't a lot of places yet that do a good job at giving us the space that we need to feel like we can continue to be successful and move at the same rate, because we are as smart and are bringing in as much money and are putting out as much papers. But there's going to be times that are going to be jagged in our career because of the physical aspects of our body. And so that is definitely like a very big struggle. And young women, when I'm mentoring them, is something that a lot of times they're thinking about and they're talking to me, and that's playing into whether or not they want to go into a PhD program or whether or not they want to go into academia. I've had so many young women come and sit in my office in like their early 20s and say, I want a PhD, but I want a family. And I'm like, oh, but you can do both. But like, there's so much surrounding that from the top down, showing like some people showing that, oh, this is so difficult because of the resources that we do or don't have. But then I think there are other women out there that are just doing like an incredible job of showing like, no, like I can have the family life that I want to have, and I can have the professional life that I want to have. And I'm defining success for me in these particular ways. And I'm not going to let other people define what's successful. And I do think that we have to do that a little bit more than men have to do, and to like accept what success is for us and try not to compare ourselves to other people in the same way that, maybe men may do a little bit more. And I'm not going to pretend like it's easy, right? Like, of course it's difficult, but it's 100% possible and encouraged. And yeah. And again, it's just, what is it that you want with your life, personal, professional, everything, and don't let other people judge you for it. Because I feel like women get it on both sides, because they're like, oh, I'm this big academic, I spend all this time at work, and then they're like, why aren't you taking care of your kids? And then there's the other side that's like, you're this like big academic, don't you want children? And you're like, well, what do you want me to want? Like, you feel all this external pressure from both sides all the time, and you have to fog that out and be like, well, I don't care what anybody wants me to want, I care what I want. My physical strength. My lab mate was like 6'5", like a really big dude, and my advisor like expected us to be able to carry the same like levels of instruments like in different places, and I felt like, oh, I have to do this even if it's gonna like make me pull my back out to carry this 150-pound piece of instrument, which is silly. But then, then the other one is like actual like women's health, like getting your period when you're surrounded by men feels like an embarrassing thing, and it shouldn't be embarrassing. Like, especially with me, I'm out in the field, I'm out on boats for like 9 hours a day, like that, as a man, you don't even think about that. But as a woman, you're like, well, what am I going to do in the middle of the day if like I have to change a tampon? And you think like, this is such a taboo thing to talk about, but it is a very real thing that women have to deal with that men don't think about. And if you're in a lab that doesn't have any women superiors, you sometimes feel at a loss, like I have nobody to talk to, or if something happens, like what do I do? Who do I run to? And I had a student that had like a conversation with me about this. I work in French Polynesia, and she had her period and was at first being a little sheepish about like, oh, I need to go back to the room to get something before I go in the field. And I was like, why? And she's like, oh, you're not a man, I can tell you. And it made me feel like really good. I was like, oh, like I'm glad that like, as silly as that is, like I can be that person to like, you can feel comfortable enough talking to me about this. But the moral of the story is like, if we just continue, if we don't act shy about those things with men, then they will have to get used to it. And it's something that they're going to have to deal with. And so I think like trying to unlearn some of the shames that were put upon us as like as being a woman, like, oh, it should be embarrassing if you get your period. And you're like, no, like this is like a thing that every single woman on the planet has to go through. So like, why are we shaming ourselves for this? And like, why is it making it more difficult for us to go into the field and do things that men don't even have? Lots of times where we're constantly being told, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're not good enough. And it becomes exhausting. And I guess, again, my advice is like, ignore the naysayers out there. If it's something you really want to do and you're putting in the work to prepare yourself, then go for it. Now, there's a very big difference between, not doing the work and not getting there versus like, I'm working towards this goal and I know that I am going to do everything I can to get there. Like, it is a sea of no a lot of times, but then you eventually get to that yes, and then you can watch your career flourish and gain the confidence of like, oh, no, I can actually get here, and it didn't matter how many people told me no at the beginning.